The wheel shattered with a crack that echoed across the empty Kansas prairie. Catherine Hartwell gripped the carriage door as the vehicle lurched violently sideways, then settled at a dangerous angle. Her driver scrambled down, his face draining of color as he examined the damage. "Ma'am, the wheel's broken clean through." His voice carried the edge of panic. "We're 15 miles from any town, maybe more." Catherine stepped down carefully, her traveling silks whispering against the carriage frame. The November wind cut across the grassland, cold and sharp with the promise of early winter. Gray clouds pressed low overhead. She studied the horizon in all directions, nothing but rolling prairie and the rutted road disappearing into emptiness. "Can you repair it?" she asked, though his expression already gave the answer. "Not here. Not with what I've got." He wiped his hands on his coat, glancing at the sky. "Sun's dropping fast. Ma'am, temperature with it?" Catherine pulled her wool cloak tighter. She'd survived worse than a night in a broken carriage, though not recently and not in garments this impractical. The reality settled over her like the approaching cold. They were stranded, helpless, at the mercy of chance and weather. A figure appeared on the road behind them, walking with the steady gait of someone accustomed to distance. Catherine's driver tensed, hand moving toward the pistol under his seat. But Catherine studied the approaching man and saw no threat. He carried tools slung over his shoulder, wore work clothes weather-stained and honest. His face held the weathered calm of the frontier. He reached them without speaking, set down his tools, and knelt in the cold mud beside the broken wheel. His hands moved with immediate competence, assessing damage, testing integrity. Catherine found herself watching those hands calloused, scarred, utterly capable. "Sir, we can pay for your assistance," she began. He glanced up briefly. His eyes were gray as the Kansas sky, kind and tired. "No need for talk yet, ma'am. Let's see what can be done." He worked for an hour while Catherine stood wrapped in her cloak and the driver held tools as requested. The stranger William. She heard her driver call him, never complained about the cold or the mud soaking through his trousers. When Catherine tried to help, he spoke gently but firmly. "Don't ruin that fine dress. Ma'am, I've got this." There was no judgment in his voice, only practical concern. Catherine felt something unfamiliar, the simple acknowledgement of being cared for by a stranger who asked nothing in return. Finally he stood, testing the wheel with his weight. It held firm. He gathered his tools, wiped his muddy hands on his already stained trousers, and nodded once. "That'll get you to town. Drive careful now." Catherine reached for her velvet purse, relief flooding through her. Social order could be restored through proper payment. She knew how this worked. Service rendered, money exchanged, obligations satisfied. "What's your price?" "Sir." William Brennan looked at the woman standing before him in her traveling silks and fine jewelry. He looked at his own hands, black with mud and axle grease. Then he looked past her at the horizon where his land waited. His children waited. His life of quiet poverty and steady work waited. "No charge." "Ma'am." His voice was soft, just passing kindness forward. Catherine stared at him. In her world, every transaction had a price. Every service demanded payment. The refusal made no sense. "Sir, that was skilled work. I insist on compensating you properly." William smiled, and something in that smile suggested loneliness recognizing loneliness. "If you truly want to repay me, then I insist you have supper with me and my children. We don't have much, but my daughter Alma makes the finest stew in the county." The invitation hung in the cold air between them. Catherine's driver cleared his throat uncomfortably. Every rule of propriety, every social convention she'd lived by, screamed refusal. Wealthy widows did not dine in poor farmers' cabins. Ladies did not accept invitations from strange men, regardless of kindness rendered. But something in William's honest eyes called to something buried deep in Catherine's carefully constructed life. When had she last received an invitation given freely? Wanted for herself rather than her wealth or status. When had she last sat at a table where she was welcomed, rather than endured "I accept"? She heard herself say, "Thank you." Her driver protested quietly. "Ma'am, the hotel in town." "Can wait." Catherine kept her eyes on William. "Lead the way." "Mr. Brennan." William's wagon rolled ahead of her carriage, and Catherine followed through the gathering dusk. The rutted road led away from civilization, deeper into the frontier landscape. She saw his life before arriving a small cabin with smoke rising steady from the chimney, a barn with weathered boards, a chicken coop, a well with a bucket hanging. Everything clean but worn, maintained with care and limited resources. Children's voices carried across the yard. Two smaller figures chased each other near the barn, while an older girl stood on the porch watching their arrival. Catherine felt her heart catch at the sound of that laughter, that ordinary domestic happiness she'd never known. William climbed down from his wagon, and the children ran to him. He caught the smallest in his arms, tousled the boy's hair, spoke quietly to the older girl. Then he turned, gesturing Catherine forward with simple dignity. "This is Miss Catherine Hartwell," he said to his children. "She's our guest for supper tonight." The oldest girl, Alma. Catherine remembered, stepped forward with a composure far beyond her years. "You're welcome in our home, ma'am." Catherine could leave now, make polite excuses, continue to the distant town, return to her world of hotels and obligations. Instead, she stepped through the cabin door into warmth and lamplight, and the smell of stew simmering. She stepped across a threshold she didn't yet understand. The cabin's interior was smaller than Catherine's dressing room in Kansas City, but it held more life than any mansion she'd inhabited. Everything spoke of careful poverty and fierce pride: handmade furniture, worn rugs, shelves lined with preserved vegetables and simple dishes. A rocking chair sat empty by the fire, positioned as though waiting for someone who never came. William's children watched her with varying degrees of curiosity and caution. Alma set the table with practiced efficiency, her young face serious. The middle child, a boy Catherine guessed at 9, hung back silently. The smallest girl, perhaps 6, stared openly at Catherine's necklace. "That's Samuel, and that's Molly," William said quietly, washing his hands at the basin. "Children, Miss Hartwell's carriage broke down on the road. I helped with repairs." "Your necklace is so sparkly," Molly whispered, "like stars." "Molly, mind your manners," Alma said softly, but Catherine smiled. "It does sparkle, doesn't it? My late husband gave it to me." The word "late" hung in the air. William glanced up from drying his hands, understanding passing between them. Alma brought the stew to the table, and they sat, this odd assembly of wealthy widow and poor farming family, strangers sharing a meal in the gathering darkness. The food was simple but good, made with care by a child too young to be cooking for a family. Catherine ate slowly, watching the dynamics around the table. William encouraged Samuel to speak up, helped Molly cut her bread, thanked Alma for the meal. The love was palpable, but something was missing. That empty rocking chair spoke louder than any words. "How long have you been alone?" Catherine asked gently. William's jaw tightened briefly. 3 years come February. Sarah died in childbirth. The baby with her. "I'm sorry." Catherine meant it. She'd heard countless expressions of sympathy after her own husband's death. Most empty. She tried for truth. "I lost my husband 2 years ago. No children. I've been traveling between business interests ever since, trying to find purpose." Alma looked up, and something flickered in those old young eyes. "You don't have children?" "No." "I always wanted them, but it wasn't to be." Samuel spoke for the first time, voice barely audible. "Do you get lonely?" The question pierced Catherine's careful composure. This child who rarely spoke had identified the core truth of her existence. "Yes," she said simply, "I do." William studied her across the table, and Catherine felt seen in a way she hadn't experienced in years. Not as a wealthy widow to be courted for her money. Not as a social obligation to be endured. As a woman carrying grief and loneliness, recognized by someone carrying the same. The meal continued with easier conversation. Alma asked shyly about cities and books. Molly wanted to know if Catherine had ever seen the ocean. Even Samuel warmed slightly, listening intently to her answers. Outside. Wind rattled the windows. The sound grew from whisper to roar, and William rose to check the door. When he opened it, cold air blasted through, carrying the first snowflakes of an early storm. "That's bad," he said quietly, closing the door against the wind. "Road'll be impassable in an hour. Dangerous to travel in the dark through this." Catherine's driver appeared at the window, shouting over the storm. William let him in, and they conferred briefly. The verdict was clear: travel tonight would be suicide. "You'll stay here," William said, not offering but stating simple frontier fact. "You can have my room. I'll sleep in the barn." "Mr. Brennan, I couldn't." "You could and you will. Prairie hospitality isn't negotiable." "Ma'am?" Catherine recognized the quiet authority. She nodded acceptance. William showed her to a small, clean room that still smelled faintly of lavender. Sarah's preserves lined a shelf, jars labeled in a feminine hand. A quilt covered the narrow bed, each stitch evidence of love and care. Catherine sat on the bed as the storm howled outside. Through the thin wall, she heard William settling his children for the night, his deep voice reading to them. The sound wrapped around her like the warmth she'd felt at the supper table. She rose and looked out the window. William crossed the yard toward the barn, lantern in hand, a solitary figure bearing light through darkness. Something in Catherine's chest tightened and opened simultaneously. She was more comfortable in this humble room than she'd been in months of expensive hotels. Dawn broke clear and brutally cold. Catherine woke to the sound of children's voices and the smell of wood smoke and breakfast cooking. She dressed quickly, braiding her hair simply, and emerged to find organized chaos. Alma stood at the stove managing a cast-iron skillet while simultaneously directing Samuel to set the table, and Molly to fetch water. The 12-year-old's face held exhausted competence, the expression of a child carrying burdens too heavy, too long. "Good morning," Catherine said from the doorway. Alma jumped slightly, nearly dropping the spatula. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I didn't hear you. Breakfast will be ready soon. Pa's doing morning chores." "May I help?" The girl hesitated. Clearly torn between accepting assistance and maintaining her role as household manager, Catherine crossed to the stove without waiting for permission. "What needs doing?" Together they prepared breakfast, and Catherine experienced the simple competence of frontier life: timing biscuits, testing eggs, managing the temperamental stove. Alma relaxed incrementally, and by the time William returned from the barn, they were working in comfortable rhythm. He stopped in the doorway, surprise flickering across his weathered face. "Miss Hartwell, you don't need to." "I wanted to," Catherine said simply. "Alma's been teaching me." Over breakfast, William explained the situation. The storm had damaged Catherine's wheel again, loosening his temporary repair. Proper fixing required parts from town, and the roads were deep in mud. 2, maybe 3 days before travel was possible, Catherine's driver would stay in the barn loft. The delay meant nothing urgent to Catherine. Her brother-in-law's business letters could wait. The realization surprised her. She had no pressing obligations. Her life in Kansas City and St. Louis was a series of empty rooms and social performances. "I'd like to stay and help," Catherine said, while waiting for the repairs. William's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Ma'am, you're a guest. We couldn't impose. Consider it repayment for the wheel." Catherine kept her voice level. "I can see Alma needs another pair of hands. I have time and ability. Let me contribute." Alma's eyes widened with something dangerously close to hope. Samuel watched silently, but his expression had lightened. Molly clapped her hands together. "Will you teach me about sparkly necklaces?" "Molly," William said with gentle exasperation. But Catherine laughed, the first genuine laugh she'd produced in months. "I'll tell you everything about sparkly necklaces." The day unfolded into unexpected domesticity. Catherine learned the rhythm of frontier household management, water carried from the well, laundry scrubbed and hung despite the cold, meals planned around preserved vegetables and careful portions. Alma moved beside her, teaching without condescension, grateful without obsequiousness. William worked outside, repairing fence, tending animals. But Catherine felt his presence even without seeing him. He'd glance through windows, check on his children, his eyes lingering on Catherine longer than strictly necessary. In the afternoon, Catherine read to the younger children while Alma worked on mending. Samuel sat close, absorbed in the story. Molly leaned against Catherine's side unselfconsciously, her small warmth a revelation. Evening came early in winter, as Catherine helped prepare supper. She caught William watching from the doorway. His expression held wonder and wariness, combined, a man seeing something he'd stopped allowing himself to imagine. "You're good with them," he said quietly when the children were occupied elsewhere. "They're easy to be good with." Catherine met his eyes. "You've raised them well." "Mr. Brennan." "William," he corrected, "and I've done my best, but it's not enough. They need—" He trailed off, unable or unwilling to name what they needed. After supper, Samuel smiled a real smile, tentative but genuine. Molly held Catherine's hand, walking to the table. Alma's shoulders, perpetually hunched with responsibility, relaxed slightly. William saw all of it, and his heart broke open with hope he didn't dare trust. A week passed. The road remained impassable, or so William's neighbor reported. Catherine suspected the roads had been fine for days, but neither she nor William questioned the delay. Her family's letters could wait. Whatever this was becoming, felt more real than anything she'd known in years. The children began calling her Miss Catherine with easy affection. Molly brought her treasures to examine, interesting rocks, a bird's feather, a drawing made at the kitchen table. Samuel spoke more freely, asking questions about cities and trains and things beyond his prairie horizon. Alma confided in her while they worked side by side. "I forget what Mama looked like sometimes," Alma whispered one afternoon, her hands stilling on the bread dough. "I try to remember, but her face gets fuzzy. Does that make me terrible?" Catherine's throat tightened. "No, sweetheart. It makes you human. Memory is kind that way, it softens the edges so we can keep living." "Do you remember your husband?" "I remember him," Catherine said carefully. "But I'm realizing I was lonely even before he died. We shared a house, but not a life." Alma looked up, understanding far beyond her years in those eyes. "You seem less lonely now." "I'm less lonely now." Late that evening, after the children slept, Catherine and William sat by the fire. This had become their ritual, the house settling into quiet. Lamplight soft. Space for conversation without small ears listening. "Catherine," William said, using her given name for the first time. "I need to say something hard." Her heart clenched. "Go ahead." "My children are blooming with you here. Samuel hasn't smiled like this since Sarah died. Alma's acting like a child again instead of a tired mother. Molly—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "Molly barely remembers her mama. She's attaching to you like you're hers. Is that a problem? It is if you leave." William's voice was rough. "Women like you don't stay in places like this. You have a life waiting, wealth, society, purpose. This is just an interlude. Something different before you return to your world." "I understand that. But my children don't—" Catherine wanted to argue, but the words stuck. He was right. Wasn't he? She'd been playing house, trying on a life like an expensive dress. Eventually, she'd return to reality. Wouldn't she? "I don't know what I'm doing," she admitted. "I only know I haven't felt this purposeful in years." William leaned forward, firelight casting shadows across his face. "Purpose isn't enough. My children need permanence. They've lost too much already. What do you need?" Catherine asked softly. His eyes met hers, and the loneliness there mirrored her own. I need to know if you're staying or leaving. Because if you're leaving, I need to protect them now, before they love you so much that losing you breaks them. The question hung between them, enormous and terrifying. Catherine opened her mouth to answer, but movement stopped her. Alma stood in the doorway to the bedroom, eyes wide. Papa's right, the girl said, voice shaking. We're already broken. Mama left and we survived, but barely. If you leave too... She couldn't finish. Catherine rose, crossed to Alma, pulled the child into her arms. I'm not your mother, she said carefully. I could never replace her. I don't want you to replace her. Alma whispered against Catherine's shoulder. I want you to be you. I want you to stay. Over Alma's head, Catherine met William's eyes. The fear there matched her own. They were both terrified of wanting too much, of risking hearts already scarred by loss. Go back to bed, sweetheart, Catherine said gently. We'll talk about this tomorrow. After Alma retreated, silence stretched between Catherine and William. Finally, he stood and walked to the window, looking out at his small property, his modest life. They're not the only ones, he said quietly. I've spent 3 years telling myself I could do this alone, that I didn't need anyone, that needing was weakness. But then you walked into my house and I remembered what it felt like to have someone to talk to. Someone who understands. Catherine joined him at the window. Their reflections overlapped in the dark glass, two lonely people finding unexpected comfort. I'm scared, she admitted. Me too, William said. But I think I'm more scared of you leaving than of you staying. Catherine almost sat in the rocking chair by the fire that night. Sarah's chair unused for 3 years. She settled into it without thinking, needle in hand, mending Samuel's torn shirt. When she looked up, William was watching her, and something in his expression had shifted from fear to fragile hope. The next morning, Mrs. Cooper arrived unannounced. The neighbor woman swept into the cabin with food and gossip, her sharp eyes taking in Catherine's presence, the easy way the children moved around her. After Catherine excused herself to help Molly with a project, Mrs. Cooper cornered William at the door. That's a fine lady you've got helping. William, her voice carried false sweetness. But don't let those children get too attached. Women like that don't stay. They visit poverty like tourists visit foreign countries, interesting for a while. But they always go home. William's jaw tightened, but he couldn't argue. He'd been thinking the same thing. Mrs. Cooper patted his arm. I say it with love. You know that. You're a good man. Those are good children. But be realistic about your place in the world and hers. After she left, the words haunted him. Your place and hers. The chasm between his calloused hands and Catherine's soft ones. His weathered cabin and her world of carriages and jewelry. How could he have imagined otherwise? The telegram arrived on a gray December morning, delivered by a writer from town. Catherine opened it with trembling hands, aware of William and the children watching. Urgent stop return. St. Louis immediately. Stop estate matters. Require signature. Stop. Brother William. Concerned your extended absence. Stop respond quickly. Stop below. In smaller script. A personal addition from her sister-in-law. What are you doing in that rustic place? People are asking questions. This is inappropriate. Catherine folded the telegram carefully. I need to return to St. Louis. There are business matters requiring my attention. The words fell like stones into still water. Samuel's face closed immediately. Molly's eyes filled with tears. Alma turned away, shoulders rigid. William simply nodded, expression unreadable. Of course, he said. I'll get your things ready. William, you have obligations. We understand. His voice was flat. When will you leave? Tomorrow morning, I suppose. The day fractured into terrible politeness. Catherine tried to engage the children, but they'd withdrawn into protective silence. Alma cooked without speaking. Samuel disappeared to the barn. Molly clung to her father, refusing to acknowledge Catherine's presence. Only at supper did the facade crack. William set down his fork and spoke, his words measured but hard. "We're grateful for your help these weeks. Miss Hartwell, you've been kind to my children, but it's best you return to your life now. They need to remember this isn't permanent." "Miss Hartwell." The formality cut deeper than anger would have. "I never intended to hurt anyone," Catherine said quietly. "I know, but intention and consequence aren't always aligned." That afternoon, William had gone to town for supplies. His neighbor Henry had pulled him aside with false concern. "Heard you got a wealthy lady staying at your place. William, folks are talking. Some say you're after her money, taking advantage. Others say it's worse, improper arrangements. Just thought you should know what's being said." The gossip burned like acid. William Brennan had never taken charity, never asked for handouts, never compromised his dignity. The suggestion that he was using Catherine, courting her for wealth, made rage pulse through his veins. But underneath the rage was truth. He was a poor farmer with 3 children and a struggling property. Catherine was a wealthy widow from society. The gap between them was unbridgeable. Mrs. Cooper had been right. He'd let himself hope for something impossible, and worse, he'd let his children hope. That night, Molly cried herself to sleep, calling for Miss Catherine. Alma lay rigid in her bed, not crying but radiating misery. Samuel retreated into the silence he'd inhabited before Catherine's arrival. William sat alone in the barn, tools in his hands but unable to work. He'd failed them all, his children, by allowing temporary happiness, Catherine by not protecting his heart, himself by forgetting his place in the world, in the cabin. Catherine packed her trunk with shaking hands. Each folded garment felt like betrayal. She had obligations. Didn't she? Business to manage, family to answer to, a life that existed before this interlude. But that life felt hollow now, meaningless. These weeks had shown her what she'd been missing: purpose beyond wealth, connection beyond social performance, family built from choice rather than blood. She thought of Alma's exhausted competence, Samuel's fragile trust, Molly's unself-conscious affection. She thought of William's quiet strength, his loneliness mirroring her own, the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. She thought of the empty mansion waiting in St. Louis, the endless social obligations, the life she'd been trying to escape without admitting it. The weight of the choice pressed down like physical force, duty versus desire, expectation versus authenticity, the safety of her old life versus the terrifying uncertainty of staying. Catherine closed the trunk and stared at it. Tomorrow she would leave. William had made it clear his pride wouldn't allow him to ask her to stay. Not when the world saw him as fortune hunter and her as foolish visitor. He was protecting himself and his children the only way he knew how. She couldn't fault him for that. But it didn't stop her heart from breaking. Catherine lay awake in Sarah's room, listening to the house settle around her. She cataloged all the rational reasons to leave her family's expectations, business obligations, the weight of gossip and impropriety, the practical impossibility of wealthy widow becoming frontier farmer's wife. Against those reasons, one truth she didn't want to go. The realization was both simple and revolutionary. For 2 years since her husband's death, she'd drifted through obligations, performing roles without feeling. Then a broken wheel and a kind stranger had shown her something she'd never experienced: belonging, purpose, the sacred ordinary of family life. She'd been playing at domesticity. William had said, trying on a life like an expensive dress, but he was wrong. This was the first time she'd felt authentic, stripped of performance and pretense. Her late husband had given her wealth but not love, companionship but not understanding. She'd been lonely in a mansion full of servants. What did it matter if she was rich when she was starving for connection? But William's words haunted her. My children need permanence. And he was right. She couldn't stay for a season then leave when frontier life became difficult. The choice had to be absolute: stay forever or leave now. Could she really give up everything? Her wealth, her status, her family's approval? Could she live in a two-room cabin, work until her hands were calloused, face the gossip and judgment? The answer rose from somewhere deep and certain. Yes. For this family. For this chance at real life. Yes. In the barn. William sat on a hay bale, unable to sleep. He thought about Sarah. Really thought about her for the first time in months. His first love. His children's mother. The woman he'd planned to grow old beside. Sarah had been frontier-born, tough as the land that raised her. She would have laughed at his current predicament, in love with a city woman, terrified of the gap between them. Sarah had never doubted herself or her place in the world. But Sarah was gone, and her absence had carved out something in William he'd tried to fill with work and children and denial. Then Catherine had walked into his kitchen, and he'd remembered what it felt like to have a partner. Someone to talk to after children slept. Someone who understood loneliness because she carried her own. He'd been a coward today, pushing her away before she could leave on her own, protecting his pride and his children's hearts by breaking them preemptively. William Brennan, who'd faced blizzards and droughts and loss, was afraid of a woman in a silk dress who looked at him like he mattered. Sarah would be furious with him right now. She would tell him he was being an idiot, that love didn't come with guarantees, that Catherine had already proven herself in the ways that mattered. His wife would have welcomed Catherine, made room for her, understood that loving someone new didn't diminish the love that came before. William dropped his head into his hands. He'd sent Catherine away because of gossip and pride and fear. He'd hurt his children to protect them from future hurt. He'd rejected the first real happiness any of them had known in 3 years because he couldn't believe it was real. The barn door opened. William looked up, expecting one of the children. Instead, Alma stood there in her nightgown and shawl, her young face set with determination. "Papa, you're wrong." "Alma, go back to bed." "No." She crossed to him, and in the lamplight she looked suddenly older, wiser. "You're sending her away because you're scared, because people are gossiping, because you think she's too good for us. She is too good for us. That's not true, and you know it." Alma's voice shook but held firm. "She's been happier here than anywhere else. I see it. She doesn't care about her fancy life in the city. She cares about Samuel's smile and Molly's stories and cooking breakfast with me." "You're a child. You don't understand. I understand you're both scared and lonely and you found each other." Tears spilled down Alma's cheeks now. "Mama would want you to be happy. Papa, she wouldn't want you to spend the rest of your life alone because you're afraid." William pulled his daughter into his arms, and they cried together for Sarah, for loneliness, for the terrifying possibility of second chances. "What if she leaves anyway?" William whispered. "What if I ask her to stay and she realizes she can't?" "Then at least you tried. At least you were brave enough to ask." In the cabin, Catherine heard Alma leave, heard the barn door close. She lay in the darkness making her choice. William had pushed her away. She could respect that. Return to St. Louis. Let this remain a beautiful interlude. Or she could fight for this. Fight for herself, for the family she'd found, for the life she actually wanted instead of the life expected of her. Dawn approached. Catherine rose, dressed, and walked through the cold pre-dawn darkness to the barn. William stood when she entered, his face haggard. "I'm not leaving," Catherine said before he could speak. "Not unless you order me off your land. But I think you need to decide something. William Brennan, do you want me to stay not as a guest or helper, but as part of this family because I'm done pretending this is temporary? I'm done living half a life." "Catherine, you'd be giving up everything." "I'm not giving up anything." Her voice was steady, certain. "I'm gaining everything. I've lived in luxury and died of loneliness. Here, I'm alive. Your children aren't mine yet, but they could be. If you'll let them be. If you'll let me be." William stared at her, defenses crumbling. You're willing to stay to face the gossip, live in poverty, work until your hands are rough. Yes, all of it. For this family. For you. Catherine, I'm not an educated man. I can't give you the life you're accustomed to. I don't want that life. I want this one. William closed the distance between them, took her soft hands in his calloused ones. If you stay, people will judge. Your family will object. It won't be easy. I know. But nothing worth having is easy. He kissed her then, gentle and grateful and full of hope that terrified them both. William led Catherine back to the cabin where his children waited anxiously. Dawn broke cold and clear through the windows. Samuel, Alma, and Molly stood together, their faces pale with dread. William didn't release Catherine's hand. He faced his children and spoke the words that would change all their lives. Miss Catherine has agreed to stay. Not as a guest, as family. He paused, swallowed hard. I'm asking her to marry me, to become my wife and your mother. If you'll have her. Molly launched herself at Catherine with a cry of joy. Samuel's smile broke wide and genuine. Alma approached more slowly, tears streaming down her face. You mean it? The girl whispered. You'll really stay? I really will, Catherine promised, wrapping her arms around all three children. If you'll teach me how to be a proper frontier mother. Say yes, Molly demanded, pulling back to look at Catherine seriously. Papa asked you to marry him. You have to say yes. Catherine met William's eyes over his children's heads. Yes. To all of it. Yes. The day unfolded in joy and practicality. Catherine sent a telegram to St. Louis. Brief and firm, staying in Kansas. Stop remarrying, stop, will manage estate matters by post. Stop her families. Response came quickly, full of shock and disapproval. Catherine read it, then folded it away. Their objections meant nothing compared to the reality of Molly's hand in hers, Samuel's trust, Alma's relief. They planned a simple wedding in town for the following week. Catherine would face the gossip head-on, William beside her. Let people whisper she'd survived worse than small-town judgment. That afternoon, Catherine and Alma went through Sarah's preserves and recipes. The girl handled her mother's things with reverence, then placed them carefully in Catherine's hands. Mama would want you to have these, Alma said. She'd want you to be our mama now. She wasn't the kind of person who'd be jealous. She'd just want Papa and us to be happy. Catherine's throat tightened. I'll never try to replace her. She'll always be your first mother. I know, but you're my mother too now. Is that okay? That's more than okay. In the barn, William worked on the wheel from Catherine's carriage, the wheel that had brought them together. He'd repaired it properly, reinforced it, made it stronger than before. Now he hung it on the barn wall, a reminder that broken things could be made whole. Samuel found him there. Papa, are you happy? William pulled his son close. Yes, scared, but happy. I like Miss Catherine. She listens when I talk. Samuel's voice held wonder. And she doesn't get mad when I'm quiet. She understands quiet people. William agreed. That evening, the town pastor arrived, having heard the news. Catherine braced for judgment, but Reverend Thomas smiled warmly. I've known William since he came to this territory. The pastor said, He's a good man who's carried grief too long, and you, Mrs. Hartwell, have clearly found where you belong. Gossip will pass. Love endures. The wedding was set for the following Sunday. Catherine used her wealth practically paying off William's debts, establishing a trust for the children's futures, purchasing supplies to see the farm through winter. But she lived simply, learning to manage the household with Alma, growing calluses on her once soft hands. Mrs. Cooper came to apologize, shamefaced. I was wrong about you. Mrs. Hartwell, you're not visiting poverty. You're building a home. Thank you, Catherine said simply. And please, call me Catherine. The night before the wedding. Catherine sat in Sarah's rocking chair, her rocking chair now mending socks while William whittled by the fire. The children slept peacefully. Everything was ordinary and perfect. Are you sure? William asked quietly. Last chance to change your mind. Catherine looked around the small cabin, her home now. I've never been more certain of anything. You know I love you, he said. I probably should have said it before asking you to marry me, but I'm saying it now. I love you. Catherine. I love you too. All of you, you and these children. My family. On the barn wall, the repaired wheel hung solid and true. Broken things made whole. Second chances made real. Spring came to Kansas with tentative warmth and new grass pushing through winter-hard earth. Catherine stood in her garden, their garden planting vegetables with Molly's enthusiastic help. 4 months had passed since the wedding, and the cabin had transformed subtly but completely. New curtains hung in the windows, sewn by Catherine and Alma together. The rocking chair by the fire saw daily use. Children's laughter filled the spaces grief had occupied. William's shoulders no longer carried their burden alone. Catherine's hands were calloused now, her silk dresses packed away in favor of practical frontier clothing. She'd never been happier. The wealth remained used for security, for the children's futures, for occasional practical purchases, but it no longer defined her. She was wife, mother, partner, not wealthy widow performing charity. Alma had blossomed into her age, laughing more, worrying less, making plans for her own future. Samuel spoke freely now, sharing observations and questions with the confidence of a child who knew he was heard. Molly called Catherine Mama naturally, without confusion or guilt. At breakfast that morning, William had mentioned needing to ride into town for supplies. Catherine was packing bread and cheese for his journey when they heard the distinctive sound of a wagon. Wheel braking, on the road past their property. A neighbor's wagon tilted dangerously. The Jensen family stood beside it, looking dismayed, without discussion. William grabbed his tools and Catherine followed, the children trailing behind. They reached the wagon together. Young Mr. Jensen looked up with relief. William, thank God. We're heading to his sister's place, and the wheel just gave out. William knelt beside the wheel while Catherine spoke with Mrs. Jensen, offering water and shade while repairs progressed. Samuel handed tools to William. Alma entertained the Jensen children with stories. Molly picked wildflowers to share. When the wheel was secured, Mr. Jensen reached for his wallet. William smiled, wiping muddy hands on his trousers, the gesture that had started everything. No charge, he said. Just passing kindness forward. Catherine stepped beside him, her hand finding his naturally. But stay for supper if you can. Our daughter makes wonderful stew. The Jensens accepted gratefully. And the day became festival, 2 families sharing food and laughter. Neighbors helping neighbors, kindness rippling outward like stones in still water. After they left, Catherine and William stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the prairie gold and rose. The children played in the yard, their voices carrying on the evening air. Do you ever regret it? William asked quietly. Giving up your old life. Catherine leaned into his shoulder. I didn't give up anything. I gained everything that matters. In the barn. The repaired wheel hung as testament, broken things made whole, lives mended through unexpected grace. The cabin glowed with lamplight as evening deepened, a beacon visible from the road. Inside, a family gathered around the supper table. William took Catherine's hand across the table, calloused fingers interlacing with fingers now equally work-worn. Alma said grace, her voice steady and grateful. Samuel and Molly reached for bread with easy confidence. The meal was simple, the conversation ordinary, the love palpable. Catherine looked around the table at her family chosen, built, earned through courage and faith. This life bore no resemblance to her old existence of luxury and loneliness. This life was real. After supper, Catherine rocked gently in her chair, mending by lamplight. William sat beside her, reading to the children. Molly leaned against her father's knee. Samuel lay on the floor, absorbed in the story. Alma worked on embroidery. Adding stitches to a sampler home is where love lives. Outside, the prairie wind still blew cold, carrying the last breath of winter across the grassland. But inside, the fire burned warm and steady, tended by hands that had learned to hold each other, fed by hearts that had chosen love over fear, maintained by a family built from broken pieces made deliberately, joyfully whole. The wheel had broken on a cold November road, stranding a wealthy widow in unfamiliar territory. But that breaking had led to this: a poor farmer's children gaining a mother, a lonely man finding partnership, a woman discovering purpose, a family restored and remade. Catherine's last thought before sleep was simple gratitude. She'd owned mansions but never had a home until this humble cabin. She'd worn jewels but never felt treasured until calloused hands held hers with tenderness. She'd lived in luxury but never truly lived until love taught her the difference between existing and belonging. The broken wheel hung in the barn, repaired and strong. In the cabin, a lamp burned low through the night, light in the darkness, warmth against the cold. Proof that kindness passed forward returns as grace received, and broken things wheels, hearts. Lives can be made new,